Luke 16, starting in verse 19. There was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen and lived in luxury every day. At his gate was laid a beggar named Lazarus, covered with sores and longing to eat what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs came and licked his sores. The time came when the beggar died, and the angels carried him to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried. In Hades, where he was in torment, he looked up and saw Abraham far away with Lazarus by his side. So he called to him, "Father Abraham, have pity on me and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, because I am in agony in this fire." But Abraham replied, "Son, remember that in your lifetime you received your good things, while Lazarus received bad things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in agony. And besides all this, between us and you, a great chasm has been set in place, so that those who want to go from here to you cannot, nor can anyone cross over from there to us." He answered, "Then I beg you, Father, send Lazarus to my family, for I have 5 brothers. Let him warn them, so that they will not also come to this place of torment." Abraham replied, "They have Moses and the prophets. Let them listen to them." "No, Father Abraham," he said, "but if someone from the dead goes to them, they will repent." He said to him, "If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, they will not be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead." May God add his blessing to the reading of his word. Amen. Apathy now in this life will be too late for mercy in the next. Brothers and sisters, point number 1 is this: death is the great equalizer. Death is the great equalizer. Now, if you noticed, both the rich man and Lazarus were very different stations in life. And, right, Jesus, sharing the parable, even goes on to say, right, he adds some commentary, right? There was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen. Purple was the color of royalty, right? Back then in that day, I mean, right, dyes, I mean, they didn't have clothes like we have, and you can't get all, every color of the rainbow, Even white was really more like gray, but if you had purple, wow, that meant you were wealthy. You were royalty. And so this rich man, he's dressed in purple and fine linen, lived in luxury every day. And then in contradistinction, we have Lazarus, right? Beggar, covered with sores, longing to eat what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs came and licked his sores. Dogs back then, by the way, also too, in that culture, they're not the cute and cuddly like we think, right? They didn't think all dogs go to heaven like we do. Dogs were wild animals. Dogs were, again, dogs were like the lowest of the low. They were, you didn't touch dogs. You didn't feed them. You didn't do it. They were untamed. And so just, again, that stark image, right? Rich man, Lazarus, different stations, but they both died. And so point number 1, like I said, brothers and sisters, death is the great equalizer. Doesn't matter. Death is no respecter of persons. And can I challenge you and me today? Unless the Lord returns before you and I leave this life, we are all destined to die. And in Randy Alcorn's little book called The Treasure Principle, I love one of the points he tries to make. He says, don't live for the dot, live for the line. What does he mean by that? He says the dot is our life now. Right? Hey. If I think even in one of the Psalms, right, it says, man, if you make it to 70, that's a good dot. Right? 80, that's even a bigger dot. 98, that's a great dot. Hallelujah. We're going to celebrate Laura Lucas on Saturday. But that's just a dot, brothers and sisters, in the light of eternity. And that's the line. So think about it this way. Here's the dot, right? That's your life. That's, again, 70, 80 years if you're blessed, 98 if you're super blessed. But then there's the line that stretches out into eternity. Right? Because we believe that our souls are going to live forever. I hope you believe that. I believe that. And what Randy Alcorn tries to remind you and me is, are we living for the dot? Are we living for that 70, 80 years if we're blessed? Or are we living with eternity in mind? Are we living for the line? And I want to challenge you and me today. Where are you living? Are you living for the dot? Or are you living for the line? Are you recognizing, yeah, you know what? In the words of Eminem, you only get one shot. Don't lose your chance to blow. And that should affect, that should filter, that should flow into the decisions that you make in this life. That should flow into what you prioritize. And if you remember a couple weeks ago when I preached on the rich fool, right? Remember what I said? Right? Make a mental note. What are the things that are temporary? And make that mental note. Yeah, that really nice car I have, that's temporary. That 401k I have, that's temporary. The house I have, that's temporary. Even the job I have is temporary. But what is eternal? My wife is eternal. My children are eternal. My parents are eternal. My neighbors, even the ornery ones, are eternal. I am eternal. Brothers and sisters, death is the great equalizer. And even Steve Jobs, right? If you get a chance, listen to his commencement speech at Stanford after he had been diagnosed with cancer, pancreatic cancer, and he even said, right? He said that's one of the greatest truths that have helped him spur his creativity, and is knowing that he's going to die someday. And this is a guy who didn't even believe in God. And you and I are here today, and we believe that there is a God, that He is eternal, and that He created you and me in His good and beautiful image, and that likewise, we are meant to live forever as well. So I want to challenge you. Are you living for the dot, or are you living for the line? What decisions are you making today that reflect that? And can I challenge you? Live for the line. What does it mean then? Knowing what really matters, what is really important. Point number 2. You will always be thirsty. You will always be thirsty. Did you notice, brothers and sisters? So, and again, this is a parable, and I want us to be careful, right? Because parables, and these are great. Parables are great stories. But I also want to be careful. We shouldn't derive all of our theology just on the basis of a parable. So what I mean by that is there really, like, as Jesus describes it in the parable, is that really how it's going to be? I don't know. And I don't think Jesus was intending that to be, hey, this is the way it is. It's a parable. It's a story. Right? It's a metaphor. So, but I think there are some things, like I said, that we can glean from it, truths, principles that we can understand. And so as we listen to this parable, listen to how he describes, right? The time came when the beggar died, and the angels carried him to Abraham's side. And Abraham, Father Abraham, right? Abraham, the father of the Israelites, right? Right. So the idea is Lazarus has been carried to heaven. He's been carried. He's by Abraham's side, right? Angels carried him, right? And the rich man, right, is in hell. He's in Hades, where he was in torment. He looked up and saw Abraham far away. So he called, right? Father Abraham, have pity on me. Send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, because I am in agony in this fire. Point number 2, you will always be thirsty. Even in hell, the rich man's thirsty. And of course, I'm not talking about a physical thirst. Although, if you ask Grace or Naomi, whenever they tell me, oh, I think I have a headache, I say, have you drunk enough water today? That's my answer for everything. You're dehydrated. Drink. Yeah. No, I'm talking about spiritual thirst, brothers and sisters. There's a spiritual thirst in you, in me. And I'm reminded of that beautiful story of Jesus meeting the woman at the well. Remember that? It's in John's Gospel. And it's the heat of the day. And the woman comes to the well because, she's got a bad reputation. And she's hoping, all right, nobody's there, I'll go. And Jesus is there, and Jesus says, hey, could you get me some water? Right? And the woman, again, recognizing that Jesus is Jew and she's a Samaritan. And you have to remember, back in that day too, Samaritans and Jews, they didn't like each other. They didn't get along. According to the Jews, they looked down on the Samaritans. Samaritans were half-breeds, and not only that, but they were also theologically incorrect. They were a cult. They even had a different first 5 books of the Bible than the Jews did. And so the Samaritan woman was like, wow, why are you asking me for water? You're Jewish. And of course Jesus, right, says, you know what, hey, if you knew who's really asking you this question, you would be asking me for water. And he's like, what are you talking about? So Jesus, great conversation. I encourage you, go take a look at it later. But Jesus is talking about the water I give. The one who drinks will never be thirsty. And so, brothers and sisters, what we need to recognize today, you and me, right, is yes, there is a hunger and a thirst that God has planted in your heart and mind that only He can satisfy. And you've heard me say this before, there's only 3 things in life that won't make you happy. All right, Jimmy? There's only 3 things that won't ever make you happy. People, places, and things. And even when we heard Darryl Strawberry, again, like I was expecting, I have heard a little bit of his story. Some of you, obviously great baseball player, and, he was with the 86 Mets, boo. No, kidding. I'm just Red Sox fan here, so that's fine. But here he was talking about, he had it all. He had it all. And he said even that did not fill his heart. That did not fill his thirst. It was only created by God that God could fill. And man, he was standing up there and he was like, yep, you need Jesus. You're not a real man unless you come to Jesus. Brothers and sisters, you're not a real man, you're not a real woman unless you recognize Jesus is the one that can satisfy your thirst. And some of us, we were thinking, if I could only get to that, then I'll be good. If I only make enough money, then I'll be good. I remember soon after Grace and I were married, and she's like, I want to start a family. I'm like, oh, no. We're not ready. I had it in my mind. I said, we gotta get to this point first. And of course, there was also fear and anxiety and trembling on my part too. Someday, if I get there, then everything's going to be great. And I love a line that I remember hearing from Ravi Zacharias, one of my favorite preachers. He said, the loneliest place is when you've experienced what you thought would deliver the ultimate, and it has let you down. The loneliest place is when you've experienced what you thought would deliver the ultimate, what you thought would satisfy that thirst, and it has let you down. Relationships will let you down. Addictions will let you down. Material wealth will let you down. Man, even Proverbs says, right? I mean, wealth, it'll sprout wings and fly away. I was talking with someone and they were talking about their job the other day, and I'm like, you know what? That's not guaranteed. Brothers and sisters, what you and I need, the thirst that you and I have in our souls, can only be satisfied by Christ himself. He is the living water. And we see that in this parable, right? This rich man, he's completely oblivious to Lazarus, right? For goodness sakes, as you read that parable, right, people carried Lazarus to his gate, hoping, I'm guessing, that the rich man would notice him. And the rich man was so full of himself, right? He was dressed in fine linen and purple, and he'd feast every day, lived in luxury, right? It tells us. And even Abraham replied to him when he's trying to talk. He's like, hey, in your lifetime, you received your good things. You satisfied what you thought would satisfy your thirst. But here you are now, wishing for just a drop of water. Can I challenge you and me today? Let's go to Jesus for that thirst. And man, can I just encourage you to? We are forgetful people. And we forget that Jesus is the one with the living water. And we go to other things to be refreshed. Hey, I'm sinner number one right here. Let's reorient ourselves and go to Jesus today, fresh and new, to refresh our souls. Only he can do it. Today you can start fresh. Today can be a new day. When you say, all right, Jesus, I'm not going to drink from that other well anymore. That's a dirty well. That's a broken well. That's a toxic well. I'm going to drink from your well today, Jesus. So point number one, like I said, let's live with eternity in mind. Let's make our decisions. Let's prioritize with that in mind. Point number two, let's go to Jesus to satisfy our thirst. Point number three, if you have no mercy now, you won't have it later. If you have no mercy now, you won't have it later. What do you mean, Pastor Tom? Well, did you notice that even in death, we can all agree the rich man didn't show any mercy to Lazarus, right? And of course, we're being set up to see that. The rich man didn't have any mercy for Lazarus. He was right there in front of him. He was right at his gate. No time for mercy for Lazarus. But do you even notice in the story that the rich man is still looking at Lazarus as someone who's beneath him? Did you notice that? Here, see, look. When first of all, he can see Abraham and he can see Lazarus, right? And so he called to Abraham, Father, have pity on me. This is verse 24. Send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue. Send Lazarus to serve me. Still no mercy. Still no compassion. Right? And then what does Abraham say, right? Hey, you know what? Rich man, you had your good stuff, while you in your lifetime. Right? Lazarus had bad stuff then. Now he's comforted here and you are in agony. Besides, there's this great chasm between us, right? We can't go from you to there and you to me, right? And then even now, even still, even after that, the rich man thinks he can still try and order Lazarus around. Verse 27, then I beg you, Father, send Lazarus to my family. Let him warn them so that they will not also come to this place of torment. Right? And then, of course, he says, hey, you know what? They've got Moses and the prophets. They've got the law. They've got all that, right? And the rich man, right, says, right, but surely they'll believe if a dead man comes to them, rises from the dead and comes to them. And Father Abraham says, nope, even that won't happen. In our preaching class, when I asked them, I said, what do you think this parable is all about? Someone said, Dickens had it all wrong. Remember that story from Charles Dickens? Christmas Carol? Dickens had it all wrong. I hope you can see, brothers and sisters, the rich man lived a life, no mercy, apathy, and it carried with him into the next. There was no going back. It was irreversible. If you have no mercy now, you won't have it later. Can I just say this real quick? What do you think the opposite of love is? It's not hate. The opposite of love is apathy. And brothers and sisters, what we're made to see with this rich man, there was no love in his heart. There was no mercy. And in the next life, bless you, there's no chance to go back. But here's the thing about showing mercy. All right, and this is what I asked you when one of the questions was, what does mercy mean? Right? I've been told that mercy means getting something good that you don't deserve. Right? So here, let me give you a perfect example real quick, right? Like, if I had told my son, I'm going to go out for a bit, but I want you to mow the grass, and I want you to clean the house and clean your room, and when I get back, I'm going to check. So then I come back, lawn hasn't been mowed, and house hasn't been cleaned, his room hasn't been cleaned, right? So what do you think he deserves? Judgment. Punishment. But what if I were to say, you know what, son? I'm going to take you out for ice cream. That's mercy. Now, here's the thing, right? And this is the point that I'm trying to make, and so I hope you follow me here for a moment. In order to be able to show mercy, you need to be able to be shown mercy. And this is where I was going with my preaching class the past Tuesday. I said, this isn't just a moral story, right? Because, you could, if you were to look at it on its surface and say, you know what? Yeah, okay, so just do more good deeds in your life. Just show just show mercy to people who are less fortunate, and then you'll be good. Brothers and sisters, that's not the moral of the story. That's not the point. Every moralizing religion in the world says that. Brothers and sisters, you and I have a God who has shown us mercy. You and I have a God who went to the cross, who took the place, who took our place, who took the place of Lazarus in a way. If you were to look at this parable, Jesus became sin for you and for me so that we could be shown mercy. And that is a truth that you and I can only understand through the conviction of the Holy Spirit. And that's when you get to the end of this parable, right? And Father Abraham saying, you know what? If they don't listen to Moses and the prophets, they won't be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead. You know what? You know what he's trying to say right there? It's an unrepentant heart. An unrepentant heart. Right? And of course, we're on the other side of the cross and the resurrection. And we believe that Jesus rising from the dead is a historical fact. And of course, we even see today, right? There are people who don't believe. And of course, even Lazarus, the namesake. By the way, this is the only parable where Jesus names a figure in the story. Only parable. And he's named Lazarus, which, by the way, is also the name of the guy he rose from the dead. Remember? Lazarus, come forth. His good friend Lazarus, by the way, who was wealthy. Him and his sisters helped support Jesus in his ministry. And guess what? When you read that story in the book of John, right after Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, and it says many people started to believe in Jesus, there were still some who did not believe. And in fact, they were plotting Jesus' death as a result. Brothers and sisters, this is the warning to you and to me today, is not to have an unrepentant heart. Do you recognize that you're one who needs mercy, that you need the mercy of God? Right? It's like that saying goes, right? But for the grace of God, there go I. And one of the things that we learned at the retreat, right, when we're talking about forgiveness, right? Your capacity to forgive is dependent upon your own realization of how much you've been forgiven. You follow me? Your capacity to show mercy is dependent on knowing how much mercy you need. How much mercy you've been shown. And can I just say this too as a side note? Some of you have done this. Some of you definitely, you know God's mercy. You've tasted and seen how good it is. And yes, you've lived in that truth. But I want to talk to those of you who have felt wounded, who have felt hurt. Who have wondered about God's mercy now. And maybe you're feeling like Lazarus in the story. And you're like, geez, hey, God, just send the angels to carry me away. I'm done. I've got sores all over me, Lord. I'm done. Can I encourage you? Jesus' mercies are new every morning. His faithfulness, right, is steadfast the Bible tells us. And can I also say this too? God sees you. God sees you. And God, right, speaking of Moses and the prophets, in the good Old Testament book of Micah, one of those minor prophets, this is what he says, right? As for you, right? He says, he has shown you, Micah 6:8, he has shown you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. And that's the key. Before you can show mercy, you need to humbly receive it. And Jesus himself in the Beatitudes in Matthew 5 speaks directly to this parable. Listen to this. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Brothers and sisters, apathy now in this life will be too late for mercy in the next. Can I ask you, where do you need to let God's mercy increase in your heart? Where do you need to humbly receive God's mercy for you today? If you let God's mercy invade your life, invade your heart now, based on this parable, it will have ripple effects into eternity. Receive God's mercy in you now and let it flow through you. Knowing that you've been shown mercy, Jesus went to the cross for you and for me. We don't earn it. We don't deserve it. It's not because we've been good enough. It's because He is good enough. Let that truth invade. Let that truth, let God's mercy push out all the gunk. Let it push out the lies. You know, I led a breakout session at the retreat. And one of the guys, very interestingly, and he was really asking, he was serious. He's like, yeah, I know God forgives me, but I don't know how to forgive myself. Because, you know, he had made some mistakes in the past. He had hurt people. And I was reminded of a Tim Keller quote. It says, and Tim Keller says, you know, the people who say, I know God forgives me, but I can't forgive myself, you know what they're really saying? Is that they've let an idol down who's more important than God. And I want to ask you, is there someone in your life that's on your heart and mind right now even? God, help me to show mercy to that person. Or God, Help me. I need mercy from that person. I want to challenge you, encourage you. Let's look to the Lord first for that mercy and ask him to let it flow. Pray with me, please.